The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
That's fantastic, Jason.
Fantastic.
Great.
All right, everybody, if you're watching right now, this is not the webcast. The webcast will begin in 30 minutes. If you are watching the recording, feel free to fast forward 30 minutes to the beginning of the webcast. This is our tribute today to John Hammond, a pioneer, man who thought he could bring back dinosaurs, and he did.
It went real well.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
And I hate the meme where people talk about how he did all the, John Hammond did all these things, but only hired one IT person. That's not true. When you read the book, there's like an entire team of IT people. They only sent one person to the island to do the updates. So you couldn't send the whole organization.
And you all know in IT, because just from experience, that is the worst guy in the company. Like the one guy. It's like, so how do you feel about going out to an island off of Costa Rica to do this? Like, oh, is it going to be a beach?
Nope.
No, not really. Really, is there like a luau or food? Nah. They sent the most expendable IT guy they had.
It's Newman. Yeah.
All right, so we actually have John Hammond here. John Hammond.
I'm here in like
John's on
144p.
Yeah.
Right?
They look awful.
Yeah. John, what happened?
If
you could
really let go these days, don't I?
The only thing we can do to improve this is if you go down to webcam, go to preferences, switch to 16:9, so at least you have the same amount of real estate as the rest of us.
Don't do it, man. They're trying to make you look wider.
All right, everybody, if you're here early, thanks for being here early. We show up early because you show up early. You show up early because we show up early. It's a vicious cycle. We have a full house with us today. We have a lot of people, because apparently this is the last webcast of 2021 that we're going to do for Black Hills Information Security. I don't even know what the tally is right now, but I'm going to go look. I think it's in the 400s or something.
It is in the 400s.
Now, wait a minute. Does that include the 24-hour pre-show banter con? Because that should be 24.
It counts as one. It counts as one.
24th.
It counts as one.
Yeah,
That sucks because we got a ton of 4-hour free sessions we did for active countermeasures for like network threat hunting. We had the 24-hour pre-show banter con. I thought I did a 4-hour session on cyber deception, or maybe that's coming up, or maybe that was 3 years ago.
It was a couple years ago, I think. Hold on. 500. I think it's going to be close to 483, I think.
Well, that's not including Wild West Hackenfest, though.
No, that doesn't include Wild West Hackenfest, does it? And their webcast?
The Hackencast, the trainings, all the trainings, the Hackencast,
not.
Oh shit, that's just disappointing then.
Not the
Ryan has all of this on a hard drive, just one thing spinning there, just holding it all
he has to go. Yeah, and his internet sucks so bad at his house that he's got to take that hard drive to like a days in to sit in the wireless network to upload it.
No, I've already told him we're gonna meet up and do a sneaker net, and I'm gonna bring it to the data center here, and we'll get it up, to the cloud.
Don't we have an office in Florida now, like a WeWork space?
I don't know if that's
working on it.
Yeah, working on it.
I approved that like months ago.
We haven't found a good one yet.
Oh, yeah, we need one with scary fast internet.
Scary.
And gigabit.
All right, so if you're here, thanks for being here. If you've been here all year long, thanks for being here all year long. If today's your first webcast because you saw this thing that we did on Monday on Log4j.
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 Hot debate right now. That keeps on
giving.
Honestly, I think you just scared 100 people right there just by saying the word.
Our numbers are going down.
So if you're here for the first time, this is not the webcast. It begins soon. And also, if you're here for the first time and maybe you got the time zones messed up, you haven't missed anything yet. So
you've missed nothing of any value at all.
That is correct. We do have John Hammond here with us for the very first time. And thank you so much for joining us, John. John and John,
lowering your standards and slumming with us, man. We appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for letting me come hang out. This is the party place, guys.
Here's a guy that should be in the running for a Webby. I mean, And we got Jason dancing with his cat. So welcome. You know?
Good to be here.
We're doing everything we can to make sure that Kyle's not nervous because we got like 1,000 people coming and he's been throwing up all morning. So,
You can't think of it as 1,000 people. You just got to think of it as like a lot of people. Like a number so big you couldn't count. If you were in a room with all of them, you'd get it wrong. That's better. That's the way I like to think of it.
Yeah, that makes it better.
And
I mean,
by the way, don't ever look at like when you're presenting, imagine 1,000 like IT people naked. That's not gonna help you.
Why did you go there?
ah.
I don't know where to go for that. I don't
Yep.
Yeah,
we've
Mal,
reached the top.
That's it. Dead.
That's it. Mic drop.
Dead.
Yeah.
Now we're done.
it's 24 minutes of silence then. Everyone be quiet.
Oh, well, things happen.
Let us be like other webcasts. Everyone be silent for the next 24 minutes.
Yeah, I still think we need elevator music.
Would it be like smooth jazz, or would it be some like, hey, maybe trance techno hacker thing? You got bluegrass banjos going in the background. What are you thinking?
I like the
Rap.
bluegrass. I like the bluegrass techno.
Yeah,
Yeah.
bluegrass
Well,
techno.
But we
Speaking of
found
You
music
should have
is
like
another
total
thing that
acid
GoToWebinar
jazz.
doesn't
Like instead of smooth jazz, it's like, you know, my guitar wants to kill your mama or something. So like, what the hell am I listening to?
Hey,
Well, to appease
There's
everyone
solo.
listening in, like depending on their music genre of choice, you'll have to just switch it every 5 or 3 seconds.
We will
Mm,
please
every
all
3
of the
seconds
people
good.
all of the time.
Or you could play it all at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. We're on Discord today. Hey, we're on Discord today. If you're on Discord, join us in the webcast live chat. And then Ryan, I just got the thumbs up from Bo to release his concert.
Nice.
Cool.
Can
Yeah,
you
We
he's
got permission for that. That's cool.
it's
Can you
up
make that
there.
live?
It's in process. It's not live
Okay.
yet. Process.
All right, when can we make it live? Because it says draft.
I'm hoping by tomorrow.
By tomorrow.
What are you talking about? What is this?
Bo's concert.
From the 24-hour.
I need
Silly.
to build the graphic for it. I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, I
The
totally
graphics
recorded
the way
that
it
for
is.
myself. I was just holding on to it, so now it's going to be official. So
So John Hammond's here. John Strand's here. The two of you got together last week and talked about stuff, which is cool. Got
Did
to
we
see
put
the
the
session
hangout
costume.
before the Log4j shenanigans? I think it was. It's all a blur
Yeah.
right now in my
It
mind.
was the Thursday before. Like there was Thursday, you two hung out, and then Friday, the world caught on fire, and then
Yeah.
Hey, you.
Wait, did you guys have anything to do with that?
right.
Seems coincidental.
It's a good thing that we got to talk before all of it, because otherwise it would have just completely derailed, at least in my mind. I don't know about you, John Strand.
No, it would have completely derailed the entire conversation because
Yeah.
I think we probably would have gone into the code. You could see the vulnerability right here. And why has this never been caught? We would say as if, we would have found that vulnerability years ago. But yeah, I was
Yeah,
glad
like
we were
to
able to
dig
do
in those
that.
open source projects in 2013, right? Do that in the spare time.
Yeah. That's the darkness, right? Like that's InfoSec Nietzsche. Like if you start going through and auditing all of the open source code that's being used by everyone in the world, it quickly becomes a hilarious XKCD comic that predicts the future. So, and here we are.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who works with developers, and on Tuesday morning, I was like, "Hey, have you heard of that Log4j thing?" And he's like, because he was away all weekend. Like he was like,
Nope,
Not me.
like that
I was
guy
on a
that comes out
deserted
of the
island.
woods- comes out of the woods after like 2
Survivor.
weeks, and like, what happened? And so I was like, oh well, yeah, there's this thing. Your organization doesn't use Java, does it? He was like, oh my god. That's
No,
Nope.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't ask that question. Your organization uses Java and they should be panicking right now.
Statement.
I think it was fun.
What I think is interesting, whenever an exploit or a vulnerability hits this level of knowledge and not information security, but outside of it, as soon as anything breaks, like you get calls from aunts and uncles and family members, they're like, so do you think it's that Log4j thing that's out there? I heard the Java is used in a lot of places and my credit card didn't run through yesterday. So I think it's that log4j
Yeah, my
vulnerability.
dishwasher's not working, so it's probably that. Like, do you have a dishwasher? You know.
Can you help me secure my Minecraft server?
Yes.
Oh my God. You haven't gotten those questions, have you? I'm sure if we read
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
This will blow your mind. Minecraft was patched. VMware.
yeah.
We got our priorities straight.
Priority as a species. It's like, what should we patch? Patch the Minecraft servers. Dear God.
Here. Yeah. That'll be the end.
So now,
Prioritize.
can you hack my girlfriend's Facebook account and can you patch my Minecraft?
Vulnerability. I haven't gotten those questions in a while where people are like, I think my wife is cheating on me, and then they have this whole write up on how his wife's horrible, and then can you help me? One time at BHIS though, we got this envelope, and I have it around somewhere, and it had 4 checks of $6,000 each, okay, and it had this long letter where this lady was talking about, you know, her ex-husband was having people that were breaking into her stuff, and if you could come in and prove it, she would write these. We could cash these checks. Like, it was insane. It was like 5 handwritten sheets that were like on a notepad from like a Best Western or something, and that was probably the craziest request I ever got. Good gig though, paid well. No, I didn't.
The gig went well. It went good. It went better than I thought.
We have a gig coming up, John, that's going to top that.
Oh my God, no.
Dude, you set the bar, and we are going to raise it.
Yeah. No.
It's definitely ethically questionable, but I think we've got the high ground. We'll see.
What about the request sometimes like, hey, can you find dirt on our executives on the dark web or something?
We've done that. No, not on the dark web.
Never goes well.
On their workstation.
We
On
had
their
one
workstation.
where an executive was like, you guys can do whatever you want. I got nothing to hide. And by the end of the test, I created a manila envelope filled with all the crap that he absolutely had to hide.
And then he sent us a manila envelope full of hundreds.
All these stories are
All on Markville.
Not in the pen test report, and we're not going to release it. No, he actually threatened to not pay me. He was very angry.
Whoa.
Sounds like you didn't understand the situation.
Yeah, he did not read the assignment.
What we have here is a failure to communicate.
Like, if you're that into BDSM, you probably shouldn't use your real name on your websites. I'm just putting that out there.
Oh my gosh.
You know, I had no idea that this is where we'd go with PreShow Banter today.
Who knows where it's
You never
going?
know. You never know.
Yeah, shut up for this.
That's why we did 24 hours. Because it
I
never
believe
luckily
it's all recorded.
That doesn't happen very often. I want to make that clear. If you're just joining our webcast, this is not what BHIS does normally. Normally it's just straight down the fairway pen testing.
Within
They
scope,
paid for
within
it.
range, permission.
I could just see IT administrators being like, I want to hire this company to find dirt on my executive.
Is this not reminiscent of the bastard operator from hell, which I saw that you have the books on your little video game thing in the studio?
I do. I actually, one of my, I wish that people would put in a card on who sends this stuff to me. I just got like 6 pounds of Haitian coffee. I should really double check and make sure that but it's upstairs. It's like from Haiti. I'm like, I don't know who this is from. But yeah, somebody sent me the original copies of the Bastard Operator from Hell books. And whoever that is, I thank you. That's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome.
If you haven't read it, look it up. It will make you howl.
Yeah.
Huh. It's unique. Okay. Kyle's gonna do the webcast today. The rest of us will help with questions. And that's it.
Kyle is true.
That's all I got.
I thought you froze, Jason. That was like.
Yeah, I was like,
No,
We need to be counting these awkward silences, because you remember during the 24-hour banter con, it was like, I think our record was 6 or 7 seconds. It was pretty amazing.
And we all took a nap during that. It was great.
On accident.
you took naps? Who took naps?
No, I laid on the couch and listened to it while it was going on.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I
So
couldn't sleep.
I don't know if you're here, Josh. I met a guy named Josh in the grocery store this weekend who recognized my T-shirt, and then he recognized me, And then he had watched a lot of the 24-hour pre-show banter conathon. And as he brought it up, I just started having a lot of PTSD while we were having that conversation. But it was good to see you. And if you're here, Josh, it was very nice to meet you.
You know what's the difference between the grocery store and right now, Jason? He could see your T-shirt.
Yeah. It's deep. Maybe too much.
So, John Hammond, we invited you here today because you're doing a lot of great stuff in the community. And if there is absolutely anybody that is currently listening that has no idea who you are, we wanted to make sure that we brought attention to who you are, what you're doing, what you're creating. In fact, have you had any sleep since Friday? Because at some point you released like a try to hack me box built for Log4j. I think that's how we're saying it.
Log4cheesy.
Yeah.
Butchering it, doing creative.
Log4j.
Log4j.
So John, have you slept at all? I mean, like just the amount of content that you put out between Friday and now is just astounding.
Yeah, no, well, thank you. I mean, I appreciate you kind of letting me come and hang out and as you mentioned, hey, just get a little extra spotlight on kind of the stuff that I'm up to. Log4j has been kind of crazy, as you all obviously know, and I'm trying to, be out in the front, be out trying to educate and spread some awareness, get some messaging out and about it. So the content that has came with it, yes, I showed in a video walkthrough, like, look, this is how it can affect even something as silly as Minecraft, right? And there was a practical, like, hands-on lab environment that I built out. That was the try to hack me box and lab. It was like, hey, let's beat this thing up against Apache Solar and then understand what you can do for mitigations or for detection or for patches, but understanding, and what the bypasses are, stuff like that. So I guess, sorry, I've been rambling, but to answer your question, I have gotten some sleep. It might be 5 hours, 3, 4, or less. But yeah, I'm still running and cruising, so we're having fun.
Yeah, see, that's the difference between red and blue on this. Like on the red side, I think most of the pen testers here are like, this is going to be the gift that keeps on giving. Like, we're going to find this in custom apps for the next 5 years. We're like walking around high-fiving, having eggnog. We're like, this is a great holiday season, isn't it? It's just, we're weird like that, right? It's definitely not it's different aspects.
I think it's funny too, because it's one of those ones where, like, right now I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna wait for everyone to like calm down about it, like have their chance before I start, rolling them out, because every time I do it, they're gonna assume it's real, right? Because they have no idea. They're like still trying to figure it out. But to John's point, 2022, I mean, like, we're probably gonna be using this one a lot. So.
Well, and I think we're going to be finding it in the non-standard applications. Like I said, there's like those GitHub repositories that has 100 vendors that have their notification on it, and that's cool. But where we're excited is this going to be like shell shocked. We're not going to be exploiting this in Apache or maybe VMware, who knows? But it's the custom stuff. The custom stuff is going to be the true gift.
This is when we're going to send the right message in a chat and get shell on some EDR vendors like thing way back in the back end and be like, well, that was way past the scope here. This was interesting.
Then you find out you've just hacked like the Siemens Security Operations Center, and it's like where they have 150,000 customers as part of an MSP. You're like,
And the only reason they didn't know is because they didn't think somebody would send this message that's typically not publicly exposed, right? In some platform that ends up talking,
Well, this isn't on our website, so we're secure.
Good.
And to confirm, this is not the John Hammond that started Jurassic Park, just in case anyone.
He does know Unix.
Different person. And just to
but
be very
when is
clear,
his next concert? Because I know he's also like Walter Payton and Michael Jackson. He's also Ed Sheeran. So.
John, don't worry. Like, seriously, this is the level of crap they give me because I have a super male model named John Strand.
Yes. When I was this is hilarious. When I was trying to build the thumbnail for the video that we were putting together, I was like, hey, let me Google John Strand images so I can go ahead and grab something. The dude's like shirtless in his underwear. I'm like, this isn't the John Strand I know.
Or isn't.
Or isn't.
Here's my question. I wonder, do we give him more publicity or him himself give us publicity? I'm not sure, right?
At this point, we're giving him way more publicity.
Yeah,
like,
it totally flipped.
His modeling career is over.
Look,
as soon as he was arrested for January 6th. He was actually fired from his agency and all kinds of different things. Yeah.
Gentlemen, I get it.
what just
Yeah,
shows abs are a great thing, but John Strand's brains are ripped.
Just throw up my mouth a little. Yeah.
I agree. That wasn't where we wanted to go. So John, do you have any plans on like upcoming future, like I know for like doing webcasts and things, there's always things you want to do that are like the white whale of a webcast. And for us, it was attack tactics where we went through and did a hack beginning to end all the way to domain administrator. And we finally made that happen. It was super cool. So for you and like your YouTube channel, what is like the white whale webcast that you want to do, or the recording on YouTube that you want to do? That it's just like, this is a lot of work, but it's something that you've always wanted to do.
Oh, dude, this is a can of worms and a ginormous question, I got to admit. So like, I'm always bumbling around different ideas, stuff that I want to be able to get out. Ultimately, I'd like to like have something for everyone for anything they might be interested in, which is super hard. Like, cool, let's talk about sysadmin stuff in like Linux and Windows. Let's talk about malware development in Golang or Rust, or like, whoa, let's get into some of the crazy, spooky, scary dark web Tor onions shenanigans and malware analysis and still pen testing, Active Directory, blah, blah, blah. There is way too much that I want to be able to put out, and that is the giant boulder that I try to roll up the hill. One thing that I'm really kicking around is I had put together a showcase at a trade show, like at a live event and conference, that was a hackable kiosk, like a computer you might find in a coffee shop or a library or something. And I wanted to get folks in front of it and try to have them break out of it. So it's super accessible, right? You don't need to know any programming or coding or scripting. You don't need to be a elite hacker. You just need to kind of press buttons on the keyboard and figure it out and be persistent about seeing what you can access, and then get from a web browser in a lockdown sandbox environment to pop open a command prompt in a shell. I ended up being able to put that together like within Windows 11 in their Windows kiosk mode, or like their assigned access, and I was pretty pleased with it, and I really want to get a video on that super soon. But showcasing Windows 11, showcasing some of the stuff that everyone gets their hands dirty with on a day-to-day basis, that's what I'm excited about. Long answer, sorry.
No, that's actually perfect. Actually perfect, because like I said, one of the things that's nice is we have lots and lots and lots of like interns and flying monkeys to set things up. The thing I want to do, and we're hopefully going to work with MetaCTF on this, is you have a lot of these cyber range competitions, and they're really cool, but trying to watch them is like watching paint dry. It's like watching the scoreboard. So I really want to do something that's live and interactive, where you see scores, people do the challenges, and then have some, go through and walk through the tool and technique that's being used to try to make it exciting for watching these things. But I think that's going to be really hard, because I think a lot of computers and hacking is inherently boring as hell.
Yeah, Googling for 8 hours, just banging your head against the wall.
Yeah, exactly. Going through GitHub pages of all the code that they have, looking for vulnerabilities.
1,000 tabs. So many
What's
tabs.
That?
I said 4,000.
So many tabs.
Yeah.
So many tabs.
I've been trying to record going through the holiday hack challenge, like live and raw, like cold feet, just kind of experimenting with it. And it's 2 hours of me just like drooling over the computer screen. Like, no one's going to watch this trash.
I'm going to tell you right now, Ed Scotus, Josh Wright, the counterhack team, they come straight legit. And I'm going to give everyone a couple of tips for counterhack's holiday hack challenge. Actually, the first tip is the single most important. Whenever you're looking up a vulnerability or a problem, don't just go to Google One's page of results. A lot of the higher challenges, you have to go to page 2, 3, or 4 to find a specific tool that'll help you solve that challenge. But almost every one of the challenges are straight up Googleable. If you know the different strings and the applications to do searches on, but they go out of their way to find weird, obscure vulnerabilities and things, and they're masters at it. But no, they come up with some really in-depth challenges for sure.
I'm in this year's the holiday hack challenge at some point. I think I'm in a bathroom, which is odd.
Classic.
Yeah, I heard.
You're giving a talk, like you're presenting a demo in bathroom.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So
It
over
sounds
the
bad when
last
you say it out loud.
yeah, over the last 6 years, I'm always hidden in the holiday hack challenge. I was like a plant, a hay bale, other things. And apparently this year, I think I'm in the bathroom.
Like the
I haven't
toilet?
found myself yet.
Okay. Are you like the sink, the toilet paper? Are you the toilet? Like what are you?
I don't know if anyone's found Jason in the holiday hack challenge. Let me know where I'm at because I don't know.
I might join on this just to find you. Like that's my challenge, right? Like that is the whole thing, right?
That's the solution.
Well, the first time I was playing, I was in the whatever, and I found a plant, and it says, "Hi, I'm Jason," and I responded with, "I am also Jason," and it took me a while to find out that it was me.
Who told you you were in the bathroom?
It was on Twitter. I think Scotus posted a screenshot of me in the bathroom or something. I don't know. It's,
I actually recall seeing that as well.
I gotta go find that.
I'm definitely gonna find that.
Are we just
I
gonna?
did give a
Are we just
presentation.
gonna call that out? Because that's weird, right? Like I'm not the only one. That's weird.
Oh, it makes
No,
sense.
no,
It's like a stage fright thing.
Everybody poops.
Everybody goes to the bathroom. That's a good point, Jason. Everyone goes to the bathroom.
Deal.
All right, this is not the webcast. The webcast will begin in 4 minutes. We got Kyle here. Kyle will probably give you back control of the screen to make sure that you actually have control of the screen. So I'm going to make you presenter. And then when your presentation begins, the rest of us will go away, turn off our cameras, and then it will just be Kyle all alone with all of you. And that's fun. Kyle's okay with that. Kyle knows what he's doing.
The slides are so.
It's not his first rodeo. I guess.
You got this, Kyle. I believe in you.
Can you guys see the title slide?
See the what?
Can you guys see the title slide right now?
Sure can.
We lost your video and audio and slides.
Oh,
no.
Right.
Yeah, he's gone.
Don't listen to him. We're gonna put him in the bathroom later.
Are you here?
So is this Rorschach test pass fail or?
But Jason, in honor of you in the holiday hack in the bathroom, one of these times we got to get you streaming from the bathroom in honor of Ed Scotus or something like that.
Okay.
Now, if we can get you streaming from Ed's bathroom, like we can make happen, that would be even better.
All right. Yeah, I don't see Jason.
So one of the first times I ever went to Ed's house and I was in his office. The bathroom's right there in the office, but I had to go number 2, and so I knew he was only like 8 feet away. And
Did you
it was really difficult.
Yeah, Ed and I are close enough that it wouldn't have been a problem.
How close
All right,
is
everybody,
that?
if you're here today, welcome to this
great.
Blackfield Information Security
PreShow
webcast.
Banter.
It's going to start in 3 minutes.
I play that.
If you've been with us in 20, if you've been with us at all in 2021, thank you so much. If today's your first day, then please come back. It's not always like this, but it is always like this.
It gets better.
It's
This
better.
is not
If you're
the
in Baltimore-
24-hour pre-show banter con. It seemed like it.
No.
No, that was.
If you're in Baltimore, we are having a get together tomorrow, December 17th. If you're watching the recording, then it already happened. But if you can join us on December 17th at 3 p.m., we're meeting up at Heavy Seas Brewery. And if you're on Discord right now, let us know which city you would like us to come to next, because we're going to start traveling in 2022 and going to your city and bringing you all together. Because there's a lot of people in your town that also come to Black Hills Webcast or get Prompt the Zine or order something from the Spearfish General Store. And so we're doing what we can to bring you all together so you can meet each other. And once you meet each other, then you can all be friends.
This is also Jason's way to travel the world.
Jason and Deb are going to be like, you know, it's weird. We got a ton of people in Hawaii.
Wow, Hawaii is huge, dude. Amazing.
There's remember, there's a B-sides Cayman Island that we were like, why don't we do it?
Yeah, that's a big one too. Yeah,
that's a good one.
Real big following there.
John Hammond, thanks for joining us. It's time for us to get started. If you haven't followed John Hammond on YouTube yet, most likely you have, but if you haven't, please go do that. John Strand, thanks for joining us. Thanks for giving us this, creating Black Hills in the first place so that we can do all these things. We appreciate you. 2021 was not like 2020.
I don't want to.
Have a great show,
everybody,
everyone.
Thank you. Kill your cameras, kill your microphones, except for me and Kyle. It would just be me and you, Kyle. Me and you.
Hey, so real quick, Jason, I saw somebody say my mic sounded muffled. Do I sound okay to you? Do I need to do anything?
Does he sound muffled? Ryan, pop in real quick. Dale, go ahead and kill your camera.
Oh.
Which microphone are you using?
It's a Blue Yeti.
All right, and is the blue facing us?
It's facing me, I guess. I don't know how to.
Ryan, how do you think? How do you think Kyle
It
sounds?
does sound a little scratchy, like maybe it's overdriven or something.
Do you have a gain button on the back?
I do on the front actually.
Turn it down a little
bit. Down. Is it too loud?
Yeah.
Turn the input down a little bit.
All right, is that better? Maybe.
That is better.
Is it? All right. I mean, if it's yeah. If we're good, I'm good. I just wanted to make sure it was all right.
I think it'll work.
Yep. All right.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the last Black Hills Information Security webcast of 2021. We have Kyle Avery with us today. He's going to talk about modern C2 and data exfiltration, which I'm sure no one is concerned about in the entire world. But Kyle's going to talk about it from a red team's point of view. And so, Kyle, it's all yours. To everyone who is here right now, if you have any questions, you can always ask and go to webinar. But if you want your question to be answered quicker, ask it in Discord. If you want to join us on Discord, we have the link inside of the GoToWebinar. We also have the slides too. Oh, I got a lot of spit right now. We also have the slides too, so you can find the handouts in there. You can go ahead and download the slides and follow along with Kyle. Kyle, it's all yours. If you have any issues, I'll pop back in. But other than that, take it away.
Sounds good. All right. So like Jason said, I have the Discord open here. So if you guys ask questions there, I will see it. But otherwise, oh, they want me to mess with my gain. Ryan, is that better? Maybe? I turned it down. It's pretty much at the bottom now. Not sure if you can still hear me or okay. Yeah. All right, cool. So yeah, like Jason said, I've got the Discord open, but if you ask questions in GoToWebinar or there are other people to answer them. So otherwise, we can get started. Today, I'm going to talk about modern C2 and data exfiltration. So my name is Kyle Avery. I'm a pen tester and a red teamer at Black Hills. I'm also an instructor with Wild West Hacking Fest. I'll touch on that at the end. I linked my Twitter and GitHub there, so feel free to follow those if you like. As for our agenda for today, I'm going to first just go over some background information, and then we're going to move into some different methods of getting traffic from malware implants to a place that we as operators can interact with them. And that'll make a bit more sense as we go on if it's unclear, but these are kind of the different topics that we're going to touch on. So with that, I will jump into our background. So I stole this sort of graphic here from Active Countermeasures. If you're familiar with them, that's one of John's other companies, but this is sort of a way to demonstrate what command and control, or C2, is. So command and control is really just this sort of general term that refers to an interaction between three different things. So there is an operator, which could be a pen tester, a red teamer, or even a real attacker, and there is a command and control server, and then at the bottom there is a malware implant running in some company network or on a victim computer. And the way that this whole interaction typically works is the implant there at the bottom has a preset wait interval, and it will wait for that number of seconds or minutes or whatever it is. And once the wait is complete, it will connect to the command and control server. And it can do that through a variety of protocols. Typically, we're going to use something like HTTPS, but it could also be just HTTP. It could be DNS. It could just be, raw TCP or UDP. It could be ICMP, right? And there's lots of ways that you can get traffic from a computer to another across the internet. And what it's going to call out to do is to ask if there are any new instructions. And the way that the command and control server gets instructions is from the operator. So the operator there on the left, they will instruct the command and control server to queue up a new instruction. That instruction could be to persist on the host. It could be to execute some dynamic code. It could be to copy information out of the environment, right? To copy files or exfiltrate them off of the computer. And so the next time that implant calls out, if there's a new instruction there, it will execute it locally. And then the next time it calls out, it will include the results or the data retrieved from that instruction. And so this whole process is what I'm referring to when I say command and control. Now, that being said, there's another piece here that we can talk about, which is a redirector. And so the reason that a redirector is important, and we'll kind of go over what that is here, but the reason you might want a redirector is because, as you can imagine, maybe from a defensive perspective, if an administrator or a blue team or whatever it may be identifies the IP address or the host name of that command and control server and blocks it, now all of your implants are essentially useless. They can no longer call out and get new instructions. They can't send new data. And so the operator has to essentially start all over because all of their implants no longer function. And so a way to sort of make this an easier process is with this idea of a redirector. So I have this graphic here at the bottom, and you can see on the left, there's the victim computer that has the malware running on it. And instead of calling directly to a C2 malware server, it will connect to this intermediate device, and this is a redirector. And so it will call out to the redirector, and the redirector typically has some kind of logic to determine whether or not it should forward it on to the real C2 server, or it should just forward it on to, some other domain or something else. And so in this case, the malware might be configured with a certain, or let's say it's using HTTPS. The malware might be configured with a certain HTTP header, and the C2 server, the redirector server will determine whether or not that header has been included. And if it has, it will forward it to the real C2 server. And if it has not, it will forward it to, in this case, login.microsoftonline.com, but really it could be any, normal site or back to the company site or whatever you'd like this to happen here. And the nice thing about these redirectors is that they are stateless. All they do is they take in data and they forward it to the backend C2 server. And so losing a redirector doesn't necessarily mean that your implants are useless. So typically what you can do is configure multiple redirectors. So you could have a list of them on different platforms, and some of the platforms that we're going to talk about. And once one of those domains is burned, the callbacks that are destined for that redirector will not work. But once it reaches the next redirector in the list, then it will function. And so in something like Cobalt Strike, you can set this up to sort of round robin through them, so it'll alternate through all of the domains. You could also configure it to try the first domain for an hour and then the second domain for an hour. Or most C2 frameworks have at least some kind of options. I'm going to talk mostly about Cobalt Strike because that's what I tend to use, but pretty much most of the things we're going to talk about apply to just about any of them. So as you can see, the redirector here sort of saves us the pain of rebuilding an entire C2 server and building new malware implants. All that we have to do now is make sure that there is a list of domains that the implant can call out to, so that if one or multiple get burned, it still has other ways to get out. So let's talk a little bit more about these redirectors and sort of their value. So I already mentioned they're stateless. There's no session data happening here. But the other thing that's nice about using a redirector is that they are less likely to be identified as malicious. So if you stand up a Cobalt Strike server, for example, and you perform a port scan of it, you're going to see whatever ports are associated with the listeners, and you're also going to see port 550, which is the management interface. And so finding port 550 and performing, just a typical service scan, you're going to quickly identify that that's Cobalt Strike, even if you block that off. If you have the Cobalt Strike HTTPS listener running and you scan for, say, the JAW3 SSH hash, you can identify this server as being the sort of Java backend for Cobalt Strike, and there are lots of online projects that just sort of scour the internet for the JAW3 hash associated with Cobalt Strike. Server responses. So if you connect to a Cobalt Strike listener with an invalid request, it's going to have a response that is not necessarily unique to Cobalt Strike, but could be used to fingerprint it. And so when you put a redirector in front of your C2 server, now you can sort of change all of these attributes. If I put a redirector in front of it that's Nginx, for example, which is the first one we're going to talk about, all of the sort of scanning of the server and all of the associated hashes and responses and things are going to be those of Nginx, which is a very typical web server that a lot of websites on the internet use. So I've said a couple times, we're going to talk about a bunch of different redirectors, but there are 4 sort of attributes that I think make a good redirector that we're going to use to evaluate each of these options. So the first, and this is probably the easiest to meet, is we want a redirector that resides in a country that our target company or business or whatever it may be operates in. And so if we have a company that we're testing that does business in the United States and doesn't do business in South America, for example, we don't want to put a redirector in South America because that IP could potentially stand out or it could be blocked. Pretty much any like IT shop that I've worked at prior to Black Hills, they had geo-blocking on their external firewalls that would block blocks of IPs based on what countries that they were from, and also IPs that they received from threat intel and things like that. And so you want to make sure that the IP address that you're using resides in a place that would seem reasonable for someone inside the company to be connecting to. The next thing you want is some kind of transport layer encryption. So typically this is going to be TLS for HTTPS traffic. And this ensures two things. First of all, it makes sure that the malware traffic is harder to inspect because it's encrypted, and so it requires one extra step for anyone monitoring the traffic to inspect it and potentially identify it as malicious. The other thing that this does, though, is it also just sort of protects the data that we're taking out of the network, right? So we're interacting with a client or a customer from some business, and we don't want their information or files or data about their company being exposed to anyone who wants to act, or who might be, listening for that traffic that wants to access it. And even real attackers, right? They don't want the data that they've worked to exfiltrate being exposed to anyone else. So there are lots of reasons to encrypt this outbound traffic whenever possible. The third thing here is we want to have a valid SSL certificate. So I mentioned before, typically we're going to be using TLS with HTTPS, and in that case, we want a certificate that is valid. We could use a self-signed certificate and it would be encrypted, but self-signed certificates are inherently more suspicious because they're less common for internet residing websites. And self-signed certificates that are generated by something like Cobalt Strike or your C2 framework could already be signatured in some way. And so we want to make sure that our SSL certificate lines up with sort of what typical websites that have SSL certificates look like. And the final thing, and I bolded this because it's probably the most difficult to achieve, and it's the one where most of our redirector options are going to fail, is we want an inconspicuous domain name. And so what I mean by this is when we're choosing a domain, I could go and buy kylesmalware.com. And kylesmalware.com is a fine domain, except that it would stand out very obviously to anyone looking at the domains that are being connected to from their network. And so first of all, it has the word malware in it, which is already bad. But even if it didn't, it's going to have been registered very recently, which is a suspicious behavior in and of itself. And on top of that, it will almost certainly not be categorized, at least not right away, as a site that a typical user would visit. And so when I say categorize, what I mean by that is a lot of businesses have some kind of web proxy running, or at least a firewall that can inspect requests like this. And what it will do is it will actually look at the domain name that's being connected to, and it will compare that to an open source or a paid, threat intel type list of domains and what categories they fall into. And so a domain could be, medical or financial or business, or it could be malware, or it could be, gambling or adult sites, right? And so companies will typically block things that they don't think their employees should be accessing. Most companies block hacking and gambling and adult sites, but some even block things like social media, depending on what their sort of policies are. And so if we just register a brand new domain name, it's going to get categorized either as new, which is typically suspicious, or it could, if the categorization provider is able to recognize that domain as malicious, they might even mark it as a hacking related site. And so the domain name we use is often one of the easiest ways for an encrypted HTTPS listener or set of redirectors to get caught, because it might not even work right off the bat. They might already have automated systems in place that prevent us from using that domain at all. So let's jump into some of these redirectors. Yeah, what's up?
Hey, spin your microphone around real quick. Put it on the
So
other
I
side.
saw that comment. I'm pretty positive this is the right direction from when I set it up, but we can try it.
All right.
It definitely looks very wrong when I do it this way.
All right, then we'll flip back around.
All right.
And I had a quick question here. Does redirector equal reverse proxy, or is that something different?
So I'm actually just about to cover this, but basically a reverse proxy can be a redirector. A redirector is a more general term than reverse proxy, but it doesn't necessarily, or not every redirector is a reverse proxy, but a reverse proxy can almost always be a redirector, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know what you did, but your microphone sounds a little bit better. Let's keep going.
Oh, I turned it around, turned it back. It's the equivalent of turning it off and back on again. So kind of like just got brought up with the reverse proxy, for a long time, the most popular redirectors were reverse proxies, or rather web servers that can act as reverse proxies. And I say for many years, but that doesn't mean that people don't still use these. I still use these. Lots of people still use them. I just don't necessarily think they're always the best option. And you'll see why, because of some of the benefits that are available from some of these other redirectors. But specifically, projects like Nginx and Apache have either built-in or module-based capability that allow them to be a reverse proxy. And what I mean by that is that they can essentially receive some kind of request or some kind of traffic, and based on some rule set can forward it somewhere else. And that is really the core requirement of, you know, the strictest definition of a redirector. It doesn't necessarily meet our ideal list of things, but it does meet the strictest definition. And so you can run one of these on a VPS, right? So an AWS VM, a DigitalOcean VM, whatever it may be, near your target, or in a region that your target operates in, which makes them fulfill that first bullet about residing in a reasonable country. But you are responsible for getting your own domain name and your own SSL certificate. And so this is where these sort of platforms fail, or not necessarily fail, but are difficult to use, because it requires you as the operator, or you as the pen test company, to have some kind of set of domains that you manage, or at least have domains that you submit for categorization and wait. So there's all these sort of hiccups that you have to deal with when you use these. But let's go over some of these a little bit. First of all, Nginx. This is probably the simplest to use, because it does not require any additional module. And I think that the configuration is a little bit more obvious than Apache, which you'll see next. This is a very simple Nginx configuration. In this case, first, it's going to try whatever path you connect at. It's going to look for those files in the current directory, or it's going to look for directories in the current directory that match that path. And if that doesn't match up at all, it's going to go to the C2 block. The C2 block will pass all traffic to the team server IP, which you'd have to replace with the IP of your malware command and control server. It won't verify SSL certificates of the backend server, and it will add these headers to it as well, just to show you kind of some of the options that you can do here. Now, Apache is similar. It does require a module, the mod rewrite module, to be installed to use this, but that's really not a problem. It's just one extra step. And so I've wrote a rule here, and you can see the rules here are a little bit less intuitive, I think, but you can do approximately the same thing. So there's really no difference in terms of, you know, what is better, what is worse. So in this case, though, I have some conditionals. So you can see lines 2 and 3 there. The first one, line 2, if the request does not match either the purple or green paths that I included there. So first of all, there's the purple path, so some/path/here.php, or the green different/path/here.php. If the request doesn't match one of those, it will fail and go to that last rewrite rule, google.com. If it does match that, it's going to check the second rule, which looks for that blue user agent in the request as well. And so you would configure this to match up with your C2 network profile. So in Cobalt Strike, that's a malleable C2 profile. Other frameworks have different names for it, but whatever you configure your malware to use, or your implant to use as a URI and a user agent, you match those up here. And now when that Apache web server receives the packet, it will inspect it for these attributes. And if they match, it will forward it to team server IP. And if it doesn't, it will forward it to google.com. And so, as you can see, pretty simple. It's not, you know, a ton of setup required for these, but again, you do need a domain name still and an SSL certificate that you set up yourself. And I'm going to have a demo, I think, in a few slides where I show you setting up an SSL certificate yourself for something else. So that part is really not that hard. There are some caveats that come with making your own versus using one that's provided to you, and I'll go over that as well. So once we get past this idea of traditional redirectors, the next sort of technology that came out was content delivery networks. And this is something you might already be familiar with, even if you know nothing about redirectors, because CDNs are very popular for lots of things. So really what a CDN is, and some examples, there's Cloudflare is a very popular CDN, but all of the major cloud providers also have these now. The CDN, though, is really just a collection of servers that are meant to sort of speed up the internet. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're in California in the United States, and you're trying to access a web server in New York. Typically, you would connect, and it would have to go all the way to New York for each request and then respond back to you every single response. And there's one server that every user is communicating with, making requests. And so if the server is overloaded from all the requests, it might be slower. What Cloudflare does is it has servers all over the United States and the world, and it will cache your website once you sign up. It will cache your website at each of these servers, so that if I'm in California and I visit your website in New York, I'm actually going to be directed to the California Cloudflare server, and I can interact with that for as long as the information is cached. And if there's any reason for me to need new data, that server will actually reach out to the New York one itself and get the data, instead of me having to request from 2 different IP addresses. And so this masks the IP of the original server and sort of frees it up to not have too much load because of the caching. And so as you listen to this, hopefully you're thinking that this sounds a lot like a C2 redirector as well, right? If we disable the caching feature, which almost all of them let you do, once we disable that feature, now it is just a set of servers spread geographically that when you connect, forward traffic to the original and then retrieve the data, and they don't expose any information about the backend server. The other nice thing, and we'll talk about some examples here, but the other nice thing is that a lot of these CDN services even give you a free domain or subdomain, and some will even give you a already set up SSL certificate. And so when you use a CDN for your command and control redirector, you save a ton of time and effort required because you're provided all of that data already. Now, before we can talk about some examples, I want to touch on this idea of domain fronting. Domain fronting, you may be familiar with, is a sort of variation of using a CDN as a redirector. And this is a technique that was very popular for some time and I think has mostly fallen off now. There might be people still using it. I personally don't. But domain fronting in particular is a technique that has been largely mitigated by either the vendors of these CDN platforms or by security products. And the way that this works, it takes advantage of I wouldn't even necessarily say a bug, but really just a behavior of how content delivery networks work. And so what happens here is you make a request to some site that resides on a CDN. So let's say google.com, and this is not true, but let's say google.com is on Cloudflare as their CDN. And when you make a request for your malware, well, let me back up. You set up your kylesmalware.com as a redirector in Cloudflare as well. And so now you have Cloudflare running Kyle's malware, and it's also running google.com. There is a potential that you could configure your implant to connect to google.com in an encrypted session, but when the Cloudflare redirector decrypts that HTTPS traffic, it will see the HTTP host header as kylesmalware.com. And so the company that is analyzing the traffic, unless they decrypt it, will only see google.com, but when the traffic arrives at the CDN endpoint, it will forward it to the correct host header of kylesmalware.com. And so when this first came out, this was a very popular technique because it was able to totally bypass a lot of controls, and almost all of the major CDNs allowed you to do this. But since then, a lot of the CDNs have either fixed this or have started to really monitor this type of behavior very closely. So I believe Azure is one that you can still do this on technically, but excuse me, as soon as they detect you doing this, they will shut down your subscription or your account and will totally burn your redirector, basically. And so domain fronting is one of those things that was very effective, but I don't think is probably a great idea anymore. But I wanted to touch on it here because it's so closely related to CDNs. Now let's talk about some examples of content delivery networks that are, in my opinion, a viable C2 redirector option. The first one here is Azure. So the Azure CDN is really great for 2 reasons. First of all, you get a free domain, any name you want, .azureedge.net. So if I'm targeting, Kyle's Toolshed, I can get kylestoolshed.azureedge.net as long as that isn't taken. And so now it's a domain that looks like something that the administrators might expect to see. It might even match. Maybe we can match it to a vendor or some product that we think that they might use, right? We have a lot of options here since we can specify any name. And there is already an SSL certificate provided with this from Microsoft. So when you look at the traffic and you inspect that certificate, it's going to look very legitimate because it is, and the domain name is not going to look malicious as long as you choose a name that seems reasonable or doesn't look malicious to the client. The configuration for this is pretty straightforward. They have a whole GUI that you can use. It's just kind of a next. You plug in your domain, you give them your DNS information. Now, the one major downside of this that makes it really not a super viable option these days is that Microsoft has gotten very good at shutting this down. So I've had this happen. I know lots of other people who have experienced the same thing, where they have an Azure CDN redirector, and halfway through their engagement, Microsoft notices and kills their entire subscription. And now that resource is gone, as well as anything else you had on that subscription, potentially. And so this is an option maybe if you have a very short op running, or if you think you can obfuscate it in a way that Microsoft wouldn't detect it. But I tend to stay away from Azure CDN these days as well. The next CDN here is Cloudflare, and I already mentioned Cloudflare. They're probably one of the biggest names in this sort of industry, and they will give you a valid SSL certificate, but you have to bring your own domain name. And so to me, this doesn't give you a ton of value over those Nginx or Apache redirectors, especially when you consider that Cloudflare is attempting to shut this down as well. So Microsoft and Azure CDN, I don't think are good options, or excuse me, yeah, Azure and Cloudflare CDNs rather, I don't think are great options. But the next option, Amazon CloudFront, is a pretty viable option. So AWS is another one that gives you a free domain, and it is a subdomain of cloudfront.net. But cloudfront.net, you don't get to choose the subdomain name. You're going to get a random name created. And so I actually stole this image on the right from a Black Hills blog about using AWS CloudFront. And you can see there the kinds of domains you're going to get. It's just an alphanumeric random value. On the left there, you can see I just took a screenshot to show you, to sort of emphasize how important that caching disabled option is. Now, Amazon CloudFront will also give you an Amazon signed SSL certificate. The only difference between this and something like the Azure CDN is that your backend server has to have a valid SSL certificate for this to work. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in our demo here on the next slide. From my experience, the AWS CDN or the Amazon CloudFront offering has been the most lenient. I've never had one get shut down. I would expect that if you as a company reached out to Amazon and said, hey, we see this C2 traffic, they would probably shut it down. But unlike Microsoft or Cloudflare, they're not actively searching for those to stop them. So this to me has been a pretty solid option because it gives you the domain name, it gives you the SSL certificate. The only small problem is you can't choose the domain name yourself. So this is my first demo here, and we're going to set up a very basic example of the AWS CloudFront, and I'm going to show you me sort of requesting an SSL certificate and how it looks beforehand and afterwards. So for this example, I have an EC2 instance, which is just an AWS VM, and it's running here at that IP address. And when I look up demo.winpostex.com, which is sort of my not safe domain, it's pointing to that IP address. And if I load demo.winpostex.com, it loads the Nginx splash page. And when I load this CloudFront address that I created, it also loads the splash page. Pause this here, it's a little fast. And you can see here on the third tab, I try and go to the HTTPS site of that CloudFront domain that I created, and I get a 502 error. And the reason for this is because there isn't valid SSL running on the backend Nginx server. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to my VM, and I'm going to use certbot, which is a tool from the EFF. It's totally free. And I'm going to use this to request an SSL certificate. And for the domain name, I'm actually going to specify the CloudFront domain. This is something that my coworker Steve discovered recently, is that you can pretty much do this for any of these CDN platforms. And it will request a certificate. So even if they somehow found this backend certificate, it would still match the CloudFront domain. And then when I go back to the CloudFront page, it totally loads correctly. And you can see it's verified by Amazon, not Let's Encrypt. And that's kind of the key there, is that the certificate is still being provided for, or excuse me, being provided for, star.cloudfront.net. And that still allows it to apply to my domain once I have that valid SSL certificate. All right, moving on. So let's talk about some other cloud services. So I mentioned, right, AWS, Azure, and other cloud platforms have CDNs like this, but this isn't the only service that they offer, right? Many of these cloud platforms have a sort of serverless offering, is what they call it. And the way that this works is you give them the code for your application, and they manage the sort of server, whether that's Nginx or whatever other, IIS, some web server that they're managing, and they're just running your code on it. And that's nice because they can sort of turn it off when it's not in use, and there's like all these benefits for developers for using that. But from our perspective, it's nice because it's essentially just a different way to do the same thing that they may not be looking at as closely. And so Azure, Cloudflare, and AWS all have serverless offerings. We're going to specifically talk about Azure and Cloudflare. I haven't looked much at using AWS Lambda myself. I'm sure that that would also work in a similar way, but I just haven't tested it. So Azure and Cloudflare will both give you free domain names in this case, though, and Azure will again give you that free Microsoft certificate. So the first offering from Azure is called Azure App Services, and this is a service. You give it your code. You can select a variety of languages. So unlike some of the other options, they give you like a huge dropdown of any kind of programming language you want to write your, in this case, redirector code in, and the service can be used totally free. So as an attacker, right, it kind of gets annoying spinning up all of these cloud services and paying for all of them. The free tier of Azure App Services is more than sufficient for all of the operations that I've done anyway, and at least the ones of those that I've talked to about this. And so this is kind of nice because you're not going to pay for really anything to use this service. There is a person on Twitter at BashExplode. They wrote this GitHub project CS2 web config that's linked in the slides, or you can Google it. And this is a tool to automate this setup for Cobalt Strike. So it generates all of the code based on your malleable C2 profile so that it will sort of filter based on the paths and things like I talked about in the Nginx and Apache section. But for our demo, we're just going to do something really simple. Once again, we're going to have it just redirect to a web page so that you can kind of see how that looks. So this is me in the Azure portal, and you can see I'm on the App Services page. And I know it's a little tiny. Hopefully that's somewhat legible. But basically what's happening here is I'm creating a new web app. And sort of in this center box, I'm going to type whatever name I want. In this case, C2 demo BHIS. And that is the domain I'll get. I'm going to select .NET 5 as the programming language. And then on the right here, I'm going to choose the free tier instance for this example. There's a couple other options that it asked me about. I just sort of disable all of the logging and things because I don't care about that in this case. And finally, it's going to start to spin up. So the important thing to remember here is that we're going to get that c2-demo-bhis.azurewebsites.net as opposed to azureedge.net on the CDN. We're going to get the Microsoft signed certificate, and anyone connecting to this endpoint will not know anything about the backend server. And so it really does protect, if configured in a correct way, it protects our backend C2 server. And so the next thing that I'm going to do once this finishes loading, they have a sort of web-based text editor. 2 questions coming from GoToMeeting. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, Word actually, like I'm kind of, what about GCP? GCP is not one, or that's Google Cloud Platform. That's not one that I've experimented much with. Could be a good option. I really don't know. And was there a second question?
Interrupt. I was just kind of cueing you that when you come to a breaking point, is this a good spot?
I'm kind of waiting for this to deploy anyway, so it's not a.
All right. So how can a redirector be configured to determine which is malicious traffic and then redirect? I'm assuming redirector could be functioning as a defense.
Yeah, absolutely. So the sort of conditional rules that I touched on a little bit can be extended quite a bit. So you could say, this HTTP user agent has to match. It has to have maybe some specific unique header that you add as well. That is, something you come up with that probably wouldn't match anything else. You can have it match specific IP address sources so that it only can come from the target environment. There's pretty much anything that you can imagine as a parameter of the HTTP request that you're receiving, you can use as a sort of key that if it doesn't match, you can forward it somewhere else.
Excellent. And here's one that may be an outlier. Do you have any tips on how to bypass Microsoft E3 or E5 for a spear phishing test on a red team?
I don't have anything specific off the top of my head. Yeah, as far as phishing goes, this is almost exclusively meant for like malware command and control and data exfil. So some of these could be used for phishing, especially the ones that grant you domain names and things, but that's not something that I really plan to cover in this.
All right. Back to you.
Cool. So once this deploys, you can see here they've got the app service editor. And this is just a sort of web-based, it's not even an IDE, it's really just a text editor. And once this sort of loads, you can see, okay, I get to this page, and I think I need to go to the next demo. Yeah, so once this loads, the first thing I'm going to do here is paste in this boilerplate config. And I'm going to pause it here and explain what that is. So this is the bare minimum IAS configuration necessary to redirect something, or excuse me, to write a rule that we're going to use to redirect something. So there are these sort of setup tags, but the key is that innermost set of rule tags. I'm creating one rule in this case, and it's going to be called redirect all traffic. And once it hits this, it's going to stop processing, so it won't look at any other rules. But as I'm going to add to this is a sort of action, and the action of the type is going to be rewrite. And so we're going to say any requests that come in, I want to rewrite the URL to be demo.winpostx.com. And I also don't want to log the rewritten URL because, again, I don't really care about having logs in this case. So once this is done, now I can go and load the c2 demo. Oh, actually, I take that back. There's one extra step. This application host.xct. This is something that I am directly copy and pasting from that CS2 web config. It's just a sort of general sort of reverse proxy configuration that you need as well. And so this is the same for Cobalt Strike or any C2 you use, but I'm just pasting that in from their repo directly, and I'm moving it up one directory as they instruct in the repository. So there's really clear instructions that they have for setting this up start to finish. But once I get that all in there, I can restart my app services resource, and I can browse to c2 demo bhis.azurewebsites.net, and you can see I get my Nginx page. And if I look at the certificate, it's verified by Microsoft Corporation. And this is something, again, I've had really good luck with these staying online for a very long time. This isn't something that is going to get taken down quickly like the CDN does, at least right now. Microsoft may shift their focus to it if it gets more popular or if they, get to that item on their list. But this is not something that, that right now they're really working on stopping. So moving on, the next serverless offering that we can talk about is Cloudflare Workers. So Cloudflare Workers are very similar to Azure App Services and AWS Lambda. They only support JavaScript code, unlike those options. And so you have to write a JavaScript redirector, but that's not really a problem. They will give you a domain, but it's a little bit different. So in this case, you first create a subdomain of workers.dev. So you'll see in my demo, the subdomain is going to be c2demo. So I have c2demo.workers.dev, and then each JavaScript that you want to run has to have a subdomain of that. So the actual domain that the malware will be pointing to, in our case, would be testing.c2demo.workers.dev. And so a little bit more wordy, but at the end of the day, it's the same result. Now, you do have to request an SSL certificate for the backend server, just like you did with the Amazon CloudFront offering, right? The cloud, well, actually, I take that back. In this case, Cloudflare will, in this case, you have to request the SSL certificate on the backend server, but if you try and specify the workers.dev domain name, Let's Encrypt will fail. And so the one downside of this is that there is a potential that the backend domain name could get exposed by investigating the worker. And that is not true, I don't think, of the Azure App Services offering. Now, you could combine this with something like Azure App Services right behind it, or with a traditional Nginx redirector to sort of obfuscate that further. So this isn't really a deficiency. And I can't say I've ever had someone inspect the SSL certificates to find backend domain names. I'm not saying it's not possible, but that's just not something that I'm seeing clients do very often, or at all really in my experience. So something good to know, but not necessarily a deal breaker. There is a great blog that I linked in the slides, again, from Alfie Champion, and it, again, tells you how to set this up for Cobalt Strike specifically, and you could probably apply that to just about any command and control framework you want. His blog does not have any kind of rules like the CS2 web config does, so it will just forward all traffic as far as I can tell. But still, it's a setup for Cobalt Strike. It'll get you a redirector. So let's look at this demo. On the right here, you can see my subdomain is c2workers.dev, or excuse me, c2demo.workers.dev, and I'm going to set up testing.c2demo.workers.dev. Oh, thank you, Deb. That is exactly the blog. Once this has been created, I can open Quick Edit, and it's going to have some hello world code. I'm going to just clear that out, and I'm going to paste in, and this is again from Alfie's blog, just the sort of bare minimum code required to redirect traffic. And so that first line that I'm editing is where you put the original URL, in this case, testing.c2demo.workers.dev. And the second line there is where you put the new URL, in this case, https demo.winpostx.com. And once that's done, I'm going to deploy it. It's going to post it at the correct URL. And then if I grab this domain and I go and open it, I'm going to get first the hello world because I have to refresh, but then I'm going to get this invalid SSL certificate. And this is because the backend server does not have an SSL cert. And so what I'm going to do here is go back to my terminal, and I'm going to use certbot to request a certificate for demo.winpostx.com. And so you can see, okay, I'm going to request it for demo.winpostx. It's going to successfully deploy. And then if I go back and load this page, it will work correctly. Now, let me show you, because I mentioned that you can't request for the workers thing. So I sort of reset this. I got rid of that. Actually, no, it's still there. Ignore that. But I'm going to go here and request a certificate for testing.c2demo.workers.dev. And if you try and do this like we did with the CloudFront domain, you can see I get some errors here. And there may be a way to fix this. I really haven't spent that much time on it, but this is definitely an issue. How would you be able to find the backend domain name on an Azure CDN? That is a good question, Comcast. Really, there isn't an easy way to do that. The only way that I can think of, and there may be others, but the only way that I can think of is you would have to sort of try and replicate the C2 traffic so that it matches the rules set up on Azure CDN, whatever those might be. And once those rules have been set up, you might be able to get traffic through to the original and then perform some kind of analysis. But you're not going to be able to look at SSL certificates. You're not going to be able to do some kind of domain lookup or something. And so typically it's pretty difficult to find servers that are behind redirectors. Not to say that you can't, but that is definitely a sort of challenge. And that's sort of the purpose of these, right? Is it's supposed to, at the least, make automated discovery really difficult, but in a perfect world, make even manual discovery really difficult, because we don't want the backend C2 server being discovered. Now, that being said, if you reach out to Microsoft, for example, and you tell them that this Azure CDN looks like malware, they might tell you what the backend is, or at the very least, they might shut it down. And so I think that's probably your best course of action, depending on how much time and resources you wanted to put into discovering that. All right, my last topic I want to cover for today is DNS over HTTPS. And this is something that I recently wrote a blog about for Black Hills. And it's something that I and a couple other testers at Black Hills have been using, and I think it's a really good option. So DNS over HTTPS, or DOH, is sort of the abbreviation I'm going to use there. This is a protocol that's been out for some time, and I just haven't seen it used much in the offensive space. I did a bit of Googling, and the only instance of actual malware using this that I could find was from 2019. And it was one example that they were using this for, but other than that, I don't hear much about it. So this wasn't something that I really knew how to use for Cobalt Strike for a long time until this very awesome tool called Titan Loader came out. So Titan Loader is a tool from a guy named Austin Hudson. He is someone that I absolutely recommend you follow and look at any tools that he puts out, because he's just really smart. But what Titan Loader does, well, it does a lot of things, but what the Titan Loader that he put on GitHub does out of the box is it replaces traditional DNS queries in Cobalt Strike specifically to be DNS over HTTPS requests. Now, if you investigated this a bit, you would see that his code there, you could use that in any other C2 framework. It's not necessarily specific to Cobalt Strike, but the implementation that he posted will only work with Cobalt Strike. And so because of the way that the loader is sort of integrated into Cobalt Strike, Titan Loader itself only works with that C2 framework. But again, you could sort of repurpose that same code in that repo for another framework if you wanted. Now, DNS over HTTPS is great for a few reasons. First of all, it gives us an existing domain name, right? Not even a subdomain, but an existing, very valid, very well-known domain name and a valid SSL certificate. And on top of that, we don't have to register. We don't have to make any accounts. We don't have to tell the DNS over HTTP server anything about us. It's just going to go there. And so there is basically no way for them as a provider to shut this down. The only way that I see this being easily blocked is at the company level. So if the company you're testing decides, okay, we don't use Google's DNS over HTTPS, for example, we're just going to block it. That is definitely an option because that is the only thing that domain does. If you don't need 443 to 8.8.8.8, you can block it and then this no longer will work. That being said, a lot of browsers use this by default. So if you have Google Chrome, it is probably using DNS over HTTPS. If you have Firefox, it's probably using DNS over HTTPS, even if you don't know, because that is the default configuration in those browsers, as far as I know. And so you and your company are probably allowing it and probably in a position where blocking it might break a lot of functionality. Not something you can't fix, but it's also not necessarily an easy fix for everyone to do. And so the only real downside, because from my testing, I haven't found any companies that block this yet. It's been limited, but so far of the small sample I've tested this in, it hasn't been an issue. The biggest downside here is the number of the number of packets required to do the same thing. So a DNS request, even when wrapped in HTTPS, is still a DNS request, and even a text record lookup has a very limited body of space that you can put information in. And so to conduct the same operations between DNS and HTTPS, you're going to need a lot more packets of DNS typically to get the same information out or the same data out. And so DNS over HTTPS is not a channel you're going to be transferring gigabytes of files over because that just doesn't make sense. It's too much data for this, but it's definitely a good backup. It's definitely a good channel for just general operations, right? If you're just executing commands and persisting and things, this is a great channel for that. And it's just so different from your traditional HTTPS that maybe it's less likely to get caught or less likely to be associated with your other redirector code. Now, the default time loader that got linked from Austin, it will beacon to dns.google. And I have a screenshot there at the bottom left. You can see that's where he specifies it. And that is going to be 8.8.8.8 or 8.8.4.4, depending on what resolves. But Austin's implementation is generic enough to really support any DNS over HTTPS server that I tested. So I have forked time loader, and in the main branch there, you can see on the right and that's a screenshot from my fork, where I hard code in a list of DNS over HTTPS servers. And in this case, I have DNS.Google, DNS.Quad9, the Mozilla Cloudflare, the normal Cloudflare, the Cisco OpenDNS, and the Hurricane Electric or DNS. And what my fork will do is just randomly select one of those each callback so that it's sort of different. But you could specify just one there and have it be a different one, or you could specify a smaller or larger list. I believe in there I have a comment with a link to a page with just dozens of those servers. And so you could select any of those to use depending on what you think would be most likely to get out. Because of the company, if they know about DNS over HTTPS, they might be blocking DNS.Google, they might be blocking Cloudflare DNS, but they may not be blocking Hurricane Electric, or they may not be blocking Cisco OpenDNS, because maybe they're just less familiar with it, or it's not something that they considered when they were setting up those blocks. And so the problem with the solution of just blocking every DNS over HTTPS server is there are lots of them and new ones come out all the time that you could use. And so it has a potential of getting blocked, but like I said, I've been able to use just DNS.Google pretty successfully, and even that doesn't seem to be blocked very often. And you can use all of these other servers, so you have lots of options there. So let's jump in. I want to give you a quick demo of using Titan Loader. Someone asked me about zero tier, and this is one of those like sort of VPN-based networking things, I believe. I have not experimented too much with those. Marcello, Bike Leader, who used to work at Black Hills, he has a blog very recently of using not zero tier, I don't think, but something similar, where he set up this sort of C2, a configuration using that. I think that you're still going to run into the limitation of domain names and SSL certificates. It just sort of makes spinning up lots of redirectors easier. So I think that that's something that you could use in conjunction with some of these techniques, but I can't really say. So this is going to be my demo for Titan Loader. So you can see I've got the Titan Loader repo, the official one here that we're going to use. And I'm just going to go ahead and not play. It's not playing. Okay, there it goes. Weird. So you can see there's no README here, which is a bit intimidating, but it's really not hard to use. So all you have to do is go ahead and clone that repository. So you download all the files and you CD into this repo, and we're going to run make, which will build the necessary files. And if you're missing some command that the make file requires, it will just tell you it's missing that command, and then you can install it and try again. I think it requires mingw and nasm, and there's maybe a pip module you need for Python. But once this is done, you'll get some files here. There are exe files and bin files and O files. The O files and the exes do not matter. The only output that you need is the .bin. There's an x64 and an x86, and there's also an aggressor script, CNA. So the aggressor script is what you're going to import into Cobalt Strike, and it will use those bin files. So the exes are not relevant. I've had some questions on Twitter about this where people ask me, hey, I ran the exe and it doesn't do anything. The exe is not meant to be a standalone executable. That is just sort of an intermediate. So we build those files. I'm going to show you here my DNS server HTTPS, or excuse me, my typical DNS Cobalt Strike listener is here, and you can see I'm pointing to dns.winpostx.com. There's really nothing special. I created this just like normal though. And then once I save this, all I have to do is import the titan.cna script. And once that's imported, any beacons or shellcode or exes or any payload that I generate from Cobalt Strike will use DNS over HTTPS instead of DNS. So it's really that simple. Now I export, in this case, just an exe to keep it simple. I'm going to leave that open there, and I'm going to open up Wireshark. I have some filters here that just sort of clarify the output, but you'll kind of see what this looks like here in a second. I'm going to run on my beacon, and I'll just pause this. You can see all of the outbound traffic is destined for 8.8.4.4, and it's all going to port 443, and it's TLS encrypted. And so the end result of this is now you're using a DNS beacon just like you would normally. There's not really any difference in your workflow if you've used those before, but all of the traffic is going to be encrypted and going to, in this case, 8.8.4.4 instead of going to whatever DNS server the host has. So quick recap before we end, and I kind of color coded this, and this is just my opinion. Obviously, the color codes aren't an objective thing, but the I think best options are going to be Azure App Services, and that's because that includes a subdomain and a certificate, and it's unlikely to get shut down at the moment. And then DNS over HTTPS, which is slower, but you get the free domain and you get the free certificate. So I think it's also a good option. If you need additional redirectors, or if those won't work for some reason, I think the AWS CDN and Cloudflare Workers are probably your two next best options. Both of these will give you a subdomain, and they're both unlikely to get shut down. So they're both pretty decent options. After that, I would say the traditional reverse proxy, something like Nginx or Apache, is the next best thing. It does require you to get the domain name. It does require you to get an SSL certificate, but it's almost certainly not going to go down, so that's a good feature. There at the bottom, I have Azure CDN and Cloudflare CDN. I really prefer not to use these if I can, because it's almost certain that they're going to get shut down during the operation. And in the Cloudflare case, I have to also get a domain name, which sort of defeats the purpose anyway. So with that, that's pretty much all I have. A quick, I guess, blurb about my class, and then we'll go to questions. At the end of January, I'm teaching the next round of Windows post-exploitation. I think it's been linked in the chat already, but it's going to go over enumeration, persistence, privilege escalation, and lateral movement. Basically everything once you get your initial access to an environment, how do you go from there to your objectives? We're going to go over different tools. We're going to use open source tools. We're going to write some tools. And you can see I've got the link there to winpostx.com. We'll redirect to the anti-siphon page. So with that, CJ, are there any questions or?
Yeah, I think there might have been some confusing. When you're saying best, you're talking from the attacker perspective.
Yes, I'm sorry. All of the things that I'm talking about are definitely from the offensive perspective. So when I'm saying green, like that means the most difficult to catch or the most unlikely to stop working during your operation, whereas red will be the least likely to work for a long time and will require the most work.
And so they wanted to know what's best defenses, and they talked about who are the vendors innovating in that space. And I think from the defense perspective, you pick those ones in red.
Yeah, I would say Microsoft is probably one of the better ones. I mean, obviously the Azure App Services still works, but the Azure CDN is definitely pretty hard to use, and Cloudflare as well. Their CDN is definitely hard to use, and it doesn't give you a domain anyway. So.
You got something, Jace?
I'm looking mainly like Kyle. I asked you one time, do you have stories from your class? And you're like, no, I just teach. So when it comes to like the class that you have right here, is it a lot like what we just covered and like interacting with Discord?
Yeah. So my class is basically a mix of a lot of just sort of information dump, and then we do labs. So the information dump, I mean, as you've probably noticed, I put a lot of information on the slides, and I like that so that later you don't necessarily have to rewatch me say it all. You can just look at the slides and have everything you need. And so I try and go over as much information as I can possibly tell you in the time we have possible. And then once we've gone over some different topics as kind of a break, we jump into a lab, and I'm just going to kind of share my screen and go over it. And we're going to, write some tools. We're going to use some tools, and it's definitely interactive. I set up a whole kind of Active Directory environment in AWS, and I have C2 for everyone to use. And so there's lots of opportunities to try things and ask me questions, and just have a good time.
I have a personal question so how often does your C2 get caught? And when it does get caught, like what does that do to the rest of your test?
Sure. So I would say from a network perspective, it really depends on the customer, right? If you use things like Azure App Services and DNS over HTTPS, the C2 is not going to get caught by vendors, at least not currently. They aren't really looking at even Cloudflare workers and AWS CDN. Your things aren't going to get shut down. So the only chance for them to get shut down is by the client. And that really depends on, the type of engagement that we're doing. If it's a covert operation, it's definitely more likely, because in an overt operation, they're not trying to shut down our domains typically. And then just kind of the maturity of their program, right? If they have a team of people that are looking for those kind of things, then yeah, I mean, they're typically pretty good at noticing abnormal domains, especially ones that many hosts are calling out to at some interval. From active countermeasures, right? They've got the AC Hunter product, which is specifically made for catching any of these things, because its whole purpose is to look at the sort of frequency of traffic, not the domains and the SSL certificates and all of those things. And that's where you have to be a lot more creative, is when the environments are looking for that kind of behavior as opposed to just looking for domains. So yeah, I'd say it really depends.
So is EDR effective sometimes, never, often?
So EDR isn't really a factor for this portion, right? You still have to get malware running, which is where EDR and like the operations that your malware is taking is what malware is looking for. But the beaconing itself, I don't think there's many endpoint products that are necessarily trying to stop that. I mean, I'm sure they have some signatures for it. Like if you maybe have unencrypted traffic that's known, they may stop it. But if you're taking any kind of precautions, I don't think that the endpoint measures are going to be where they're getting you.
What else? Talked about the defenses. Someone asked about the DOH. I missed the acronym. Is there a
DNS
practical guide to DOH?
Yeah. So DOH is DNS over HTTPS, and I think somebody already linked my blog post about it, which doesn't give you a ton of background on the protocol, but at least gets you up and running with using it as an attacker. And I mean, it's a pretty well documented protocol. So if you're just curious about how it works, you can definitely Google for the RFC about it or any other kind of pages about it.
What else?
Kyle, what are you planning to do for Christmas?
My parents are in town, actually, so I'm probably gonna go see them later today.
Awesome. Well, we're coming up to the end of the hour, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. We might stick around for a few minutes of extra, but if not, thank you so much for joining us for today's Black Hills Information Security webcast with Kyle Avery about modern C2 and data exfiltration. If you ever need a red team threat hunt, and if you're considering to get a SOC or change your SOC in 2022, you can always contact us about that. We have what's called an active SOC. What that means is we are active, we're not passive. Anything final thoughts, Kyle?
No, yeah, thank you guys all for coming.
All right, everybody. CJ, do you have any questions that you want to ask if we go into extra innings?
Wrap it up and we'll go to post-show banter.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here in 2021. If you joined us before today, thank you so much for coming back. If today was your first time, we do this all the time. We'll see you in January of 2022. And with that, that is finished. We are now in what's called post-show banter, where we just stick around for a few minutes and go, hey, Kyle, great job. Your microphone gets a little bit better throughout.
I don't know how.
I don't know what it was. Yeah. There was definitely someone on the team that for almost a year, we just couldn't figure out what it was. And it was finally like, what do you see when you look at your mic? And we could tell that it was backwards. And so all of a sudden they flipped it around. I was like, that was it. That was it. But I don't think that was the problem that you were having.
Yeah, my microphone, I can't show it to you, but if I flip it around, it definitely looks wrong. Like it's not the right, it's not the right direction. When it's spun around.
It might be a little bit that you're standing up and you're a couple feet away from it instead of right and directly in front of it, because it's picking up the top instead of the side. So.
Help it a little bit better, maybe. I don't know.
And Deb the Deb confessed that it was her. That is correct. It was Deb the Deb.
Dang it, Deb.
Right.
Any experience with F-Secure MWR Labs C3?
So I have played with C3. That's a sort of next. So if I was going to add more slides to this, that would be the kind of thing I would cover. So C3 is basically a collection of other protocols that you can conduct command and control over. So they have, I believe Slack is one, or I'm sort of blanking, LDAP. And there are all these sort of web and other protocol based services that you can use. So the Slack one is a good example. You give it a Slack token and it will write the data to a Slack channel, and then the C2 server will read that data from the Slack channel. And so from the network's perspective, all they're seeing is connections to Slack. And if you use Slack, that's very hard to mark as malicious. The problem with C3 is that the setup is quite cumbersome. So you basically have to have your malware implant running and another program running that is like the sort of C3 proxy type thing. And your malware implant will connect to that, and that will connect to Slack or whatever you use. And so I haven't really spent much time looking at obfuscating those in a way that would bypass endpoint defenses, because that would certainly be required. And so I think it's a really good idea. Like if I could easily use Teams or Slack or one of these, internet type sites as my C2, I think that would be a really good option, and, wouldn't be subject to the slowness of DNS over HTTPS, and you would get legitimate domains and all of these things. It's just, there's not really an easy or necessarily practical way to do that with existing frameworks right now. C3 is a good example, but I don't think it's very operationally useful, at least not for me.
Ton of interest in defense measures, and it sounds to me like you said, look, it requires a mature organization that's doing a lot of things well to catch it.
Right. I think if you're specifically relying on catching malware from the domains it's connecting to, you're probably missing a lot more. That is something to look for. And if you have a web proxy that categorizes domains, and you have, vendors that, in this case, like Microsoft, will try and prevent that, that's a decent measure and will stop a lot of things, right? A lot of attackers are just going and buying domains and using them, and they're very suspicious looking. They're categorized as hacking, but if you don't have a web proxy, it's going to get by anyway. But beyond that, I think there's just lower hanging fruit to look for. You still have malware running on a computer taking actions, right? And I think that that's going to be easier to detect than the beaconing to a domain a lot of the time. Now, that being said, there's still products like AC Hunter, and I'm sure there are other things too that do that I think are very effective against any of these. Not impossible to get around, right? We saw the SolarWinds thing would beacon once a week at first, which I don't think AC Hunter would see. But again, that's just one more measure that requires an extra step for the attacker to think of. And so anything that you can do to build up those layers of things that they have to consider and get around, I think you're more and more likely to catch them at one point, even if it's not the C2 domain, it might be something different.
Yeah. Hey, Kyle, have you ever used, because I've heard of using mail as a channel, but Kyle, have you ever used Google? I'm not sure what they're talking as a proxy to exfiltrate data.
I haven't. I've seen some uses of, so Google has Google Scripts, which is sort of another serverless offering, and I know that that's something that some people use, so that's an option. I've seen some posts about using like Google Docs or something for phishing, but I don't really know too much about that off the top of my head. No, I haven't used any of that myself.
Any experience with C2 over public services such as Spotify or YouTube?
Right, so that's another one, like the sort of C3 conversation. That stuff is really cool and hard to detect, but at least with the tools that I have, that's not something that is super practical at the moment. I would like to do that, but it's just not something that I've had the time to do myself, and there's not really public tools that do that.
Quick question for the audience is that tomorrow, if you're in the Baltimore, DC, Delaware area on December 17th at 3 p.m., we're meeting at Heavy Seas Brewery. So if you're part of the Black Hills community and you want to come out and join the rest of the people from the Black Hills community in the area, come join us. Or let us know in the GoToWebinar or Discord where you would like us to go next. So our plan is to visit cities where you are and then bring you all together. And I know there's COVID and I know there's things, and we'll do it as it's safe. But just let us know. Where would you like us to come to? And we'll go there.
You're going to get about 1 million, or let's see, at this point, you'll get 375 answers here.
Right.
Although some people like to know the same things. If you want to go to Austin, Kyle's there. Austin.
Yeah, definitely going to Austin. Oh, we're going to Austin for sure. That's one of my favorite places.
Definitely.
And that is
Barbecue
within driving
and music.
Yeah.
San Antonio. We're going to San Antonio too, so we'll see you there, Kyle.
Oh, hey. Yeah, that's even better.
Yeah.
Tampa, Florida.
Yeah, about an hour from Austin.
Tampa, we got lots of folk in Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that seems like a good next one, maybe. I mean, there's a lot of Black Hills people there.
Yeah, Tampa for sure. I
Hey,
think
Kyle,
Tampa's
here's a good one. What would you use to practice this at home? Like, ooh, don't try this at home, folks.
No, yeah, I mean, so really all you need is a C2 framework and a VM to run the malware in, and then you can set up these cloud services. I already mentioned Azure App Services and Cloudflare workers are free. DNS over HTTPS is free. You might pay a couple cents for the AWS or Azure CDNs, and you might pay a couple of dollars a month for running an Nginx box in AWS. But all of this you could do for a very small amount of money or free in some cases. And you could totally do this just with one VM at home. It really doesn't require a ton of setup to try this out and see what it looks like.
And Galen says, Madison, South Dakota. Galen, just come to Wild West Hacking Fest. Come on, bro. You're in the neighborhood. Just come on over. You probably have. Matt wants us to come to Kansas City. We like that. San Jose. A little more difficult. California thing.
Yeah, Extreme Paperclip says we need tour shirts. Yeah, I think once we figure out which cities we'll come to, we'll make some tour shirts.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be awesome.
I'll be a roadie.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. I think that's it for today. Thank you for joining us on this Black Hills Information Security webcast. You know where to find us. We do this quite often, but we'll see you in January of 2022. That's it. Everybody? Good?
Hey,
all right.
Cool.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to end the webinar. Great job,
Bye-bye.
Kyle.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.